and your own character doesn't necessarily shape the kind of life you have, and that creates a problem for the novel. How do we take into account all these things? Because there is, I think, something in the novel which is, by its nature, parochial. The novel wants to be about 4 or 5 girls living in a house in Yorkshire looking for husbands. You know, it doesn't want to be about that larger canvas involving the Napoleonic Wars. The novel wants to be about a woman living in rural France, bored with her husband and deciding to have an affair. And this larger canvas, the canvas of history, is incorporated into fiction with great difficulty. And yet it was certainly a part of what I learned from childhood and from the world in which I came, that it was necessary to do it, that the question of frontiers, the question of divisions, the question of conflict, was something without which the lives of the people I knew could not be explained. Just as other things were necessary to explain it. One of the major things, of course, is religion. You know, I was brought up mercifully without religion. In fact, in retrospect, I think probably the greatest gift my parents gave to me is that they excused me religion. They weren't very religious themselves. There was a point at which they pathetically decided that my sisters and I needed to have some religious instruction. So they hired what's called a Maulvi, a Muslim teacher, to come over at the weekends and lecture us in the righteous path. And my sisters, being more mischievous than I, were really horrible to him. Pulled his beard, he made fun of him, and so on. And when he complained to my parents rather spectacularly took our side. And he was dismissed, and that was the end of religion in our household, thanks to my sister's subversion. However, whether or not one is religious oneself, if you're writing about a world in which everybody else is religious, you do need to take account of it. I remember reading this a long time ago now, maybe 20 years ago now, the account of an Indian academic who I suspect to have been certifiably insane, who conceived of the project of enumerating the total number of gods in India. And not just big famous superstar Tom Cruise-like off-the-top deities, but all the little local gods of Stream and Woodland Grove and Household and so on. And he presented his work with the startling headline, for which I have absolutely no evidence for. It may, as far as I'm concerned, it could be complete garbage. But he said that there were, by his count, 300 million gods in India. Now that's a lot of gods. That is the population of the United States. These are the natural if you think about it, the population of India now is about just over 1 billion people, 1.1 billion people. So that's about 1 god per 3.3 human beings. That's really like a personal service godhead. It's like going to private school. Very small classes. And it's actually more dramatic even than that, because when I was a schoolboy in India in the 50s, early 60s, the figure we were then taught for the population of India was 500 million. The population has essentially doubled since that period. The divine population, you have to assume, has remained reasonably stable. You have to assume that divine birth control is better than the human kind. And so at that time there were 300 million gods to 500 million people. And if you just push that population curve back a little further, you begin to understand that it was probably only in the late 30s or early 40s that for the first time the human population of India exceeded the divine population. And to know this gives you a very different view of realism. If there are more supernatural beings populating your landscape than flesh and blood ones, it makes you wonder who's haunting who. It certainly teaches you to write in a different way, or to call a different thing real than naturalistic realism instructs us. These are the kind of things, that the clues that I got from my life, which helped me become the writer that I am. Also clues about language. I mean, one of the great things about growing up in India is that nobody grows up speaking only one language. This is, of course, shocking to Americans. So, we barely speak one. I'm sorry, I totally couldn't resist it. But if you grow up speaking 4 or 5 languages to some degree of proficiency, one of the things it does is make you playful with language. I think it's quite normal in India, certainly in my home in Bombay, that any given sentence would contain words from more than one language, sometimes from 2 or 3 languages. You simply pick and choose the words that seem appropriate, or the expressions that seem appropriate. And that kind of play, kind of juggling act with language, is something that really helped me when I came to write in English. Because of course, when you write books, you have to choose which language you're writing, otherwise nobody can read them. And you do hope to be read by a few people who are not related to you. But what I certainly made me want to do was to find a way of loosening up English so that it had something of that feel of playfulness, and that's very much something I got from my childhood. And just to not prolong this before we have our talk and then your talk, I just want to finish by saying that the thing that I came to feel from India, above all things, was the power of story. If you grow up in that environment, one of the things you learn about very early on is the nature of the wonderful tale, because you're surrounded by these fabulous tales. And in fact, the Indian compendiums of fabulous tales are, you can say, are the source material from which all the other Eastern compendiums later came, because these stories moved west into Persia and were translated into Persian and became the so-called Hazar Afsana, 1,000 stories. Those stories were translated into Arabic, and some of them became, I think that was the Arabian Nights. So India, in many ways, is the fountain and origin of the wonderful tale. And one of the things this teaches you when you are surrounded by this material as a young person is that stories are not true, that these people never lived, these events never happened, and that therefore it is as legitimate that a carpet might fly as that people might go to work for a living. Neither of these things in the story are true. These people didn't exist or go to work, and clearly carpets don't always fly. But what it teaches you equally quickly is that the way in which these untrue stories arrive at truth has nothing to do with imitations of life. It has to do with visions of life. It has to do with offering emotional truth, offering felt truth, offering the kind of the recognition truth, the kind of truth where you say, yes, people are like that. Yes, that's how people will behave. Or surprise truth, the truth which goes, I didn't know things were like that, but yeah, I guess they kind of maybe could be. These are the truths of fiction. These are the truths of literature. They have very little to do with photographic or mimetic naturalism. And this is the thing that you learn very readily growing up in such a world. A world also of oral storytellers who still have power, and who juggle stories the way in which jugglers juggle balls, and who interest their readers by doing so, thus contradicting the great advice given by the caterpillar to Alice in Wonderland when she asks how to tell the story, and he says, start at the beginning, go on until you reach the end, and then stop. This is what we believe to be classical form, but the juggling, digressing, interpolating nature of the oral story suggests that actually that's not the best way of telling a story, that this other way might actually interest people more. And above all, I think what I learned is that the human being, all of us, whether we're writers or not, the human being is a storytelling animal. The human being, in fact, you could say, is the storytelling animal. That we are the only creature on this earth that tells itself stories as a way of understanding what kind of creature it is.